Welcome to Persons of Interest. I am your host, Derek Dockett. Paul Suellentrop is my guest in this episode, and he has transitioned from being a sports reporter and beat writer at the Wichita Eagle to a position in strategic communications at Wichita State University. Now, the significance of this is that Paul was always a regular at WSU Athletics as a part of the Eagle staff. But now, working at the university, he's tasked with not only telling stories of student athletes and coaches, but also faculty, staff, and the university as a whole. Paul and I discussed this, what life has been like for him working on the university side, what life has been like for the athletic department and the American Athletic Conference, and we also take a look back at his time covering WSU while in the Missouri Valley Conference. This is Paul Suellentrop on Persons of Interest. Well, Paul Suellentrop, it's been a while, sir. How you been? I don't think I've talked to you probably since Arch Madness 2016 or 17.
I would have been there was it 16 was the last?
Okay. My last one was
Wichita State's last appearance.
Wow, and it doesn't even seem that long, but I guess now that we've been in quarantine and they've been showing classic basketball games on social media, there obviously has been some games from Arch Madness lore that some Twitter followers that I still stay connected with have been brought up to pass. But how are things been with you? You've now adjusted from life at the Wichita Eagle as the beat reporter for the Wichita State Shockers, and now you're a Wichita State University employee.
I am. And now, I need to grab a media guide. I think 17 was Wichita State's. 16, 17 was their last year in the Valley, and then 17, 18, 18, 19, 20. Yeah. Okay. We got that fact checked. Yes, I work for Wichita State. I left the Wichita Eagle after 17 years in September of 17. That's when Wichita State was just on its way into the American Athletic Conference. So, yeah, that's right. The 17-18 school year was Wichita State's first year in the new conference. And I joined the university I'm in the strategic communications department in September of 17. I do a lot of different things. I do a lot of athletics, especially more during the school year. I also do some, what I guess would call the academic side or the university side as far as, interesting things going on in the university. If we've got a student who's doing, interesting research or has a fascinating internship or professors or, just any of those kind of things that go on around a university, I write things about that. During this pandemic, I've really done a lot. There's been less to do in athletics, although I've done still, continue to do some, and I've done more as far as, the university's response to the pandemic and what is the university doing and what are, you're always going to have students or professors who are, doing something COVID related. So I'm doing stories about those kind of things. So, it's been well. Wichita State's a great place to work. People have been really nice. It's, a good transition. I knew a lot of the people already, so it's gone well. And I've been, I guess one of the biggest things I've noticed, I've been really impressed with how genuinely attentive they are to the needs of the students during this time. I've been on a lot of Zoom calls that I really have no function other than to just listen and take notes in case there's something that, StratCom would need to know. But boy, for a school of 15, 16,000 students, I've been very impressed with the deans and the professors and provosts and everybody about, how they really are putting in a lot of time and really caring about the students. And that's been interesting to see.
Yeah, I have the same feedback from the K-12 side of everything is always student-centric, student-first driven of, are their needs being met? Are we doing what we can? And things like that. So it's been a positive in this sort of cloudy situation that we've all been dealing with to make sure that things are going well. So I'm curious, you're actually probably one of what, 3 or 4 different communications, journalism type folks that I've spoken with now for the podcast. Going back to your time at the Wichita Eagle, how'd you start there? You've obviously got the journalism and the communications background. How many years were you even at the Eagle? I should have started asking that to begin.
I started the Eagle in January of 2000, so I was there basically 17 years. And I'm from Wichita, grew up here, did not go to Wichita State, went away for college, worked at some other places, but throughout different things, I would bump into people who worked at the Eagle, mostly the state track and field meet. I would come down and cover that as a sports writer here in Wichita. So, just got to know some people at the Eagle. And when they had a job opening, I think they knew I don't know that I had ever actually sent them anything. Maybe, I'm sure over the years I don't know that I had anything around that time. I think they knew I would, I was from Wichita and would be interested in coming back. So I came back in 2000 I was St. Joseph, Missouri for about 9 years. Came back in 2000 to the Eagle. I was on the sports copy desk for about 5 years. And then I started covering Wichita State in summer of 2005.
And then you got to see the renaissance of Wichita State basketball and athletics there as they went on a great run. So from your time at the Eagle, I'm curious to know, I've gotten perspective from young journalists, guys that are covering high school sports, guys that have been covering professional level. Pretty unique situation there because the city of Wichita doesn't have a professional sports franchise, and Wichita State's a pretty big deal there, as they have been for a while. The level of coverage you provide probably coincides with readership, probably coincides with interest. And in a town like there where, once the basketball team goes on a great run, for example, or the baseball team has success, there's more interest in it. And that probably drives, what you're doing or what you're covering. Do you ever find that there are stories that you didn't want to leave behind? And what was the balancing act of making sure that, the preps weren't left behind or some other, side story was left behind? Because I always think people they see the major stories, but how much you guys do from a journalistic side of making sure that all bases are covered, if that makes sense.
Yeah, when I started, when I started and throughout most of my tenure, we had a vibrant, big sports department. We had two full-time high school writers for probably up until 2010 or 11, somewhere around that area. So for most of my tenure there, or at least a good chunk of it, high schools was a big deal. We had two full-time people that covered it, and then we had a small, probably 5 or 6 part-timers, correspondents. A lot of them were college students, or maybe somebody who, enjoyed writing but had another full-time job. So you would send them out to games. So, the Friday nights on a football night or basketball night, it was a major undertaking. You'd probably cover 6 games, maybe 5, 6, 7 games, depending on what was going on. You may have, if it was a big game, you may send our columnist out to that. You would have 5 or 6 people in to answer phones, because in 2006 you might get some faxes, but most people were calling in the box score and the details. So and you'd send out 2 or 3 photographers. So it was, and then you'd have 4 or 5 copy editors. So it was maybe 20 people involved in a big prep night at the Wichita Eagle. So, and that was a lot of fun. It was a big deal. You were rushing to get it done by 11:15 or whatever. So I think for most of my time there, we did a great job with covering all those different things because we had the personnel. Now, as we all know the sad story of newspapers that it's just not the way they can do it anymore. They don't have as many people. The deadlines have changed. So, Wichita State still remains a big deal to the Eagle, and pro sports still remain a big deal to the Eagle, but they're just not able to cover the high school sports like they used to. And that's, it's a shame from their standpoint. I think one of the things we learned is people love high school sports and they will fight for high school sports coverage, but unfortunately it's so segmented, doesn't drive traffic to the degree that maybe you would, that I would like it to. The people in Rose Hill aren't necessarily going to read about, Wichita North. So there's not a mass demanding like there is for Wichita State or Kansas State or the Chiefs or those kind of things. So, yeah, there's not as much high school coverage, and that's unfortunate.
The state of you said that the state of journalism is quite an interesting situation now, especially amidst this pandemic. Did that sort of play a role in your switch to going to work on the university and something a little bit more stable there? I've seen just in the last 2 weeks, so many reporters furloughed and laid off and things like that. Going somewhere that's a little bit more stable, that factor in your switch to going to work for the university?
Definitely. Yeah. I think it was maybe June or July of 2017, and there were a few layoffs at the Eagle. And, every time you would go through that, it happened several times over my career. I would have this, moment of panic. Why am I doing this? Why didn't I go into something else? So you start, the only way to feel better in that situation is, well, I need to apply for jobs or do something to feel like I'm taking some kind of action, even though, love the Eagle, love the job, but you just, you got to do something. So sent out a resume, somehow I called Lou Heldman, who used to be the publisher at the Eagle and then moved to the university at some point. And I wanted to use him as a reference because he knew me from my time at the Eagle, and he had also, in his capacity at the university in communications, he had been around me a lot as an Eagle reporter during the conference change, because I would talk to the president of the university fairly often about, what's going on. He would be there to, help out, monitor, and all that kind of stuff. So told him I wanted to use him as a reference. And then a week or two later, he called and said, hey, this has kind of been kicking around in my mind, this kind of a position at Wichita State. And we started talking, and it went from there. And I think Wichita State getting into the new conference was an impetus for it. The basketball team was going to be very good that year. So they thought, well, this is a good opportunity to add this position and really highlight what's going on. And that's, so the uncertainty, you reach a point where, as much as you love Wichita Eagle, and I still subscribe, it's critically important to communities, all this kind of stuff, but I don't want to end up, living in a cardboard box somewhere. So I needed to look for something different.
It's interesting because the position that you have now was actually something that has been out there, where you've got guys that have come from the journalism world to work in that situation, working for the university or the athletic department as a, I guess, internal reporter, so to speak. Wendell Barnhart did it for the Big 12, or there's been other guys doing it for other leagues and other teams. That transition smoothly for you? Obviously, you covered the Shockers so much, you knew them, just as good as as good as anybody, and so it's almost had to be just a pretty easy transition for you, I imagine.
Especially on the athletics side. And that first, I started September 7 or middle of September. My first trip, I went with the volleyball team to Temple in Connecticut. That was Wichita State's first American Athletic Conference competition. So I went there. And so that first school year, the first, 8 months or whatever, all I did was athletics, really. And that was, that was just really a continuation of what I had been doing. Now, the transition to writing more about the academic side was a little bit slower. There were kind of some fits and some starts, and I had to kind of figure things. I guess one of the things I learned is, with coaches and athletes, you always know where they're going to be to a certain degree because they have to practice and they have to play games. So if you needed to talk to somebody, you kind of had a pretty good idea, when can I talk to this person? If you set up an appointment, or, you wait till practice is over, or you watch practice and then you can talk to them then. With people on the academic side, sometimes it's different. They're not, the coaches and athletes are in a routine as far as, this is when I talk to the media. This is why I talk to the media. They expect it. With other people, it just took me a while to figure out when are they available. What's the best way? It was more difficult just kind of figuring out what's the best work routine. And I think it's gotten better over the last couple of years, where I've kind of figured out who to talk to, where to go, how to, people get to know you, all those kind of things.
So I'm curious, what was that first year like on the athletic side? Was it, I know the basketball team had their level, their share of success, but covering the entire department that first year in the new league, obviously, I'm sure excitement there in the community, excitement there for the university. What was it like to see the set of new teams, new towns, and everything that came with joining the American?
From an athletic department standpoint, again, it was pretty similar to what I'd done for the Eagle, only, except I went to work, I guess with the Eagle, I went to work at the arena as an Eagle employee 4 times a week or whatever for games and practices and stuff. Still there a lot. Now I was, that's where I worked all the time was, I had a desk in the arena. So that was different. There was a lot of excitement, and I think Wichita State picked or, joined at a great time. The volleyball team went undefeated, hosted NCAA play, so that was a smooth transition. The basketball team was very good, finishing second in the conference. A lot of excitement to have great Cincinnati team coming in. Houston turned into a big deal. It was kind of what people had hoped for in a lot of ways. Baseball even did pretty well that first year. So there was a lot of excitement to see some of the new teams. There was a lot of adjustments. Obviously, you're talking about now totally different travel. The volleyball teams and the softball teams were going from, 8 or 9 hour bus rides, which surprisingly, if you talk to them, they enjoy probably more than what you would expect. But now they're hopping on planes, and instead of going to Carbondale and Terre Haute, which are relatively short trips when you're chartering, now you're going to Connecticut and Orlando, which are not short trips. So there are a lot of those adjustments. American Athletic Conference is very football focused. I think we noticed that pretty immediately. With in the Valley, Arch Madness is 365 day out of the year emphasis. That's a big deal to that conference, and felt the differences there. Football is number one in the American, and then when football is wrapped up, then it's, then you kind of switch to basketball. A lot of differences. I think people liked it. We're discovering the level of competition is different. A lot of the advantages Wichita State had in the Valley as far as, top level of support and big city and all those kind of things. It's a lot more level playing field in the American for Wichita State. So that's something, Wichita State where, you got to deal with it. I think they knew that. There's no surprise that when you start competing with Memphis and Central Florida, that things are going to be different.
When you're at games, talking to coaches, student athletes, do you feel that your relationship has changed at all, going from beat writer to now someone that is on the same team, so to say, working at the university? I'm always wondering, because I feel some people look at that and they think, well, he's not going to ask the same type of questions that he would if he were working as an outside entity versus, working for the university. Has your mindset or mentality changed on that point, or have you noticed any of those changes within those relationships?
Not dramatically. I would say obviously it has. There are stories, recruiting being probably the best example. I don't do anything with recruiting, which that was one of the, that's one of the definite positives to the job, because recruiting just, it's just a mess. And it was just kind of this all-encompassing thing that was always there.
And people want to know about it too.
Right. It's critically important. Obviously, people want to know about it, so you got to cover it. But it's just, there's so much information. There's so much bad information. Things change. I still don't know what it means when someone narrows their list to 10 schools. To me, that means you haven't really narrowed your list at all. But, all these things seem important. So I was glad to get recruiting off my plate. And then other stories, law enforcement, arrest stories. We have any of those, or, at Wichita State, that's not a problem, but you don't have to deal with that kind of stuff. The difference, I think in general, though, it's still pretty similar. Going to games, they're still writing about the games. They've all been really, I think they're, you can't if the volleyball team is struggling or the basketball team is struggling, people are watching and they know. So I don't, there was not much of a point to trying to, fool people. And that seems pretty reasonable way to approach it. It doesn't mean that you don't try to, even in the midst of a bad season, do you still try to find good stories people would want to read? Sure. But I did that at the Eagle too.
I was going to ask, so you're obviously a veteran on reporting sports. Easy for you. Jumping to that part where now you're on the university and there are those academic stories to be told. You mentioned, you had to sort of get in the groove there. What are some of the things that you realize, man, I had no idea this was going on in the university, or this is pretty special. I want to put my effort in telling this story. When you see those kinds of things happening, because I almost feel like there's a certainty that there's people that out there, they think, college and universities exist for this thing or the other thing. But there's so many others, research, educating, the stories of students that may have come from, who knows where and didn't know if they had an opportunity and they're going to graduate. I feel you probably have stumbled onto some of those in the process on the academic side as well. Yeah,
there are just, so many of those kind of stories. And I think you always know those things are going on at a university, or in this case, always knew there was interesting things going on at Wichita State. But it's been interesting, just to talk to the different people that, maybe that for 17 years of covering athletics, I never heard about or never talked to. And then you talk to them and you really find out the passion that they have and the depth of knowledge, and how important the research or the teaching or the learning is to them. There's just, when you've got 15,000 people, you're going to have some good stories. And so, whether it's been, COVID students working with COVID or kind of talking about what their life has been, that's been great. The university's response to COVID, just astronomy research with NASA. We do so many. Wichita State has a lot of strong ties with the military, and they're really doing a lot of interesting things with helping. We've got, just over the last month, we've had Black Hawk helicopters, and I think it was B-1B bombers come into, and Wichita State is a big role in helping them duplicate parts using 3D printing and a lot of stuff that I won't go into great detail in. But basically making digital twins so that these, 30-year-old Black Hawk, how do we keep it up and running? Because nobody makes parts for it anymore. Well, Wichita State's doing some real interesting things to help those kind of things keep flying. So, there's just all kinds of things going on at that university, and it's been interesting to be in the meetings and meet the people and tell some of those stories.
As you probably know, working in communications or in journalism, technology is always a big part of, the job and doing things in a way that is appealing for listeners, viewers. You yourself do the Roundhouse podcast, which I see on GoShockers.com. What's that been like, making the switch to do more interactive stuff, and how have you used that sort of medium to your advantage?
It took me a while to get up and running, but I had some really good support from the Media Resource Center here at Wichita State, and they kind of held my hand and walked me through it. I wouldn't say it's great. It's still not. It's not like a studio production, but I've tried to smooth things out. But that's been good, and I've tried to use it to. It's a place for extended conversations. So you try to find the right people that can kind of stretch their legs a bit and talk about things. I've tried to use it a lot with assistant coaches as part of, helping them prepare, because if you're the assistant volleyball coach, you're probably not dealing with the media a lot, but maybe that's something you need to learn to do, for when you want to be a head volleyball coach sometime. And so if you feel like the head coaches get plenty of media time, maybe it's a good opportunity to let the assistant coaches talk a little bit, get some experience, get some comfort in front of a microphone. And also I think fans enjoy hearing from different voices. I've had some good response to to some of the assistant coaches. So you can use it in a lot of different ways. I've done some retrospectives, talked to some people from the '06 Sweet 16 basketball team. It's fun. As I've gotten more comfortable with the technology, I've gotten better at it, and I think there's more I can do as far as making it sound a little more professional.
You just hit on something there that got me thinking. I'm curious if this is something that's been tossed your way. You talked about talking to an assistant coach. They don't get the attention of the media. Have you sort of been looked at as maybe a resource there for talking to student athletes about media training? Because someone that's been on that other side, and now that you're on the university side, I could see an opportunity there where you could be, coaching up student athletes on, talking to the media or something like that. That's a skill I always personally thought valuably needed to, especially when it comes to college, but now even more high school kids from what I've seen of, how do they conduct themselves on social media and when talking to reporters and things like that. Got to imagine you could be a pretty useful resource there for Wichita State as preparing student athletes with the media. Yeah,
I've done some of that, particularly with Tammy Cutler, who you would know. She runs the media relations or the athletic strategic communications part of the athletic department. And I've worked with her on doing that, especially she teaches some classes, and I've come to the classes and we've, done some role playing and things like that. So I think awesome. that can be helpful. Some, I think people come in with a wide variety of experience. If you were a really good basketball player in your town, maybe you've been interviewed enough that you kind of get it and are comfortable with it. But there are some kids who, are coming with a different background. So that can be helpful.
So you had a podcast a few weeks ago where you went through some Valley history, and you had a couple of the beat writers on that were covering the league at that time. I really enjoyed it because that was one of the heyday of the Valley there. And even before I was an employee on staff there, those years of the 2006 years and 2007, I'm curious because the Valley, one of the things I always appreciated about it were two different groups of people outside of the league office. The guys that were the radio voices, because there's a group of them that were there for years and they're still there, and the beat writers. These are guys that know the league inside and out, back and forth, and they were also guys that were long tenured, as journalism would allow them to be tenured there, and they always had so much knowledge and history outside of the Mike Kearns and the Doug Elgins and the Jack Watkins of the world. I'm curious, have you sort of gotten that relationship on the same side with the American, with the beat writers and radio guys as well?
It's been different. Number one, because I don't travel as much.
Okay.
That first year I traveled, I went to everything. Since then, I haven't traveled as much for men's basketball. So that would be a significant difference. And then the life was different too. Right? When you were on your own, when I was with the Eagle, you're on your own. And after a game, sit in the media room and you would finish your story with the other writers. And when I was with Wichita State after the game, I'm on the bus to get to the plane to get out of town with them. So I haven't had as much interaction. And the other thing that's different is with not as many, I don't know if not as many, because not everybody had a beat writer who traveled in the Valley, but it seemed like many did. Not everybody does in the American.
Okay.
Because you're in a lot of pro markets where, the University of Houston is really successful, but it's not as big a deal as the Rockets or the Texans. So, like Cincinnati would travel, their beat writer, Memphis, Tulsa was close enough to drive, but boy, after you get, past that, the Orlando paper's not sending anybody with Central Florida, and, Philadelphia isn't sending anybody with Temple. So it's a little bit different media environment. Radio is probably similar. I don't really have much interaction with those guys.
Sure.
So I'm sure on the radio side, you do have something similar. From my perspective, though, it was different with the writers. I just didn't have an opportunity to mix with them as much as I did in the Valley.
Gotcha. Which obviously your position being not the beat writer for Wichita State, but being as part of the university lends for that. So, well, I gotta ask you some of your favorite memories or things like that from the Valley days that you sort of might reminisce about, because for me, now that I'm not an employee there, It's great to be a fan again. I will tell you that. It's especially as someone that is a college basketball fan. It is great to sit back on the weekends and just watch the games and not have to quote unquote work the games. And I go back, 1998, I guess, would be my first hardcore, keeping track of the Valley when I was a sophomore at Missouri State, then Southwest Missouri State, the year 98, 99 when the Bears went to the Sweet 16, the last year that they actually made the NCAA tournament, which is funny because for me, that year, the Bears didn't win the regular season, but Evansville did. And Marcus Wilson, University of Evansville, I've also now connected with. I told him the story of how he broke my heart of hitting shots in that last game of the regular season against the Bears played the Aces, last game of the regular season that year, and that's how they won. I remember a free throw bouncing off the back of the rim and going through, and that was the game winner pretty much. These stories have come sort of full circle for me after life after the Valley. For you, quote unquote, life after the Valley, I'm curious if there are anything you look back on, because not to take anything away from the American, I know Wichita State's got a great future there, but I think we can all agree that the Valley's got a great history, great tradition, something that won't change even after things go. But there are some great memories that we've probably all had, and I'm sure you probably got some of your own.
Definitely. And I think my memories of the Valley would be tied to just, where I was in life and where I was in my profession. Being I always loved college basketball. So covering Wichita State, that would have been something I would have said, that would be a big goal. I guess not just covering Wichita State, covering a college basketball team on a full-time basis. If you were to talk to me when I was age 12 or 15 or 17, I would have said, yeah, that sounds like a pretty good goal. So it was important from that standpoint. And then to cover it in my hometown, Wichita State, where I knew what a big deal it was and what a connection it had with the readers, that was important. And then I just kind of stumbled into it at the great time. You start in 2005 and they go to the Sweet 16 in 2006, and the Valley is just really, really good that year. Those games were just every night you were, competitive games. You were always checking other scores. So many, that Bradley team that finished, I think, 5th, had a lottery pick, and Marcellus Somerville and all. Yeah. It was a really good basketball conference, and they proved that in the NCAA tournament. So that was fun. I don't think I will ever forget that semifinal Saturday there in St. Louis, and that arena was packed, and it was
2007.
Yeah, that was 2006 is what I'm talking about. 2006 was great too, but 2006 was my first experience.
Okay,
that was my first trip to the Valley tournament. I had never been, and then that semifinal Saturday, that was an atmosphere as good as any. And then, I really enjoyed the Valley. I grew to like the travel. The beat writers were just, what a great group. And it was just so, I guess, whatever word you want to use, rewarding or satisfying to know that, it was Wichita State basketball was such a big deal to people. And I was out there, trying to get information and trying to do things that they enjoyed. And so you really had a good feeling of satisfaction, walking up that slanted tunnel at the Heldman Center at midnight after writing your story, and you feel like, all right, I gave people something worth picking up the paper. And then when you do it for however long I did it, 10, 11, 12 years, you get a routine and you have people you want to see and favorite restaurants, and you like getting off the plane. And then, I went back for baseball a lot because baseball was such a big deal for Wichita State. So there'd be sometimes I would be in, you might make, at least 2 trips to a lot of those Valley cities, it was, I enjoyed it. It was really important time for me professionally. And it's been odd to think, from 2005 to 2017, Carbondale, Illinois was such a big part of my life, and now I may never go back there.
Yeah.
That's odd.
Funny how life works.
Yeah. I thought the Valley staff always did a great job. I've been, been to the Big 12 tournament, covered that at various places, been to a lot of NCAA, and I think the Valley staff runs a first-class operation. That was good to be a part of. I really enjoyed it, and that was probably partially just personally where I was professionally, and then partially just what a big deal Wichita State basketball was and how the Valley played into all that.
When 2013 happened, did you see that coming at all?
No. I mean, I thought they were going to be good. I think they'd been building to that, from everything I could see from the practices that I saw in the games and Greg Marshall's first few years there was little doubt in my mind that they were going to be a really good basketball program. Now, did I think that meant going to the Final Four? No, it wouldn't have surprised me if they had won a game or two. And, you just know how that tournament is. The bracket breaks and,
right.
I always think with that tournament, you just got to keep going back. And if you go back, 1 year you're going to get a bad draw like they did against Kentucky in 2014. Another year you might get a better draw. And then so if you keep going with good teams, you're probably going to win basketball games at some point. And that team played really well. They got, I guess, a favorable draw. They had to beat the number 1 seed and I think Ohio State was the number 2 seed. But it was obviously, and when you look back, at the time we didn't know there were 3 NBA guys on the roster. And then you look back and you say, well, that's really helpful to have Clay Anthony Early, who played in the NBA, and then Fred, who's turned into a really good NBA player. And then you had Ron, who spent several years in the NBA. So that's helpful too. That was just a really, a lot of things came together, and, they played really well and took advantage of it.
Finish up. I'm curious, your goals in this position, working with the university. Obviously, athletics is going to be part of your responsibilities there, the academic side. But is there any one thing that you really hope that you can sort of put a stamp on that makes readers online or folks that follow what you do for the university realize something they may not have realized before? I know personally, I have the same thing of, when I have this goal, I want to attain this, and this is what I want to do for the kids at the Wentzville School District. You have a goal like that for what you're doing, your position, and something that really hits home and says, this is a valuable piece of content, or this is something that I hope really is looked upon as something that's valuable down the road?
One of the things we talk a lot about in strategic communications, and I'm not an expert in a lot of the things that we do in that department. There are a lot of people there who are a lot more strategic and a lot more, just have that background in, how do we shape our messages, and how do we get this out? How do we handle these situations? And I'm just kind of there, tell me what story to write and tell me how I can help. And I'm happy to help. So I do a lot of listening. So I think we've got a lot of interesting things going on at the university, and I think the goal is, how do we get them out to people to let them know, like the work with the military. In my mind, I think that's really fascinating that Wichita State's playing this important role in doing this for the military. How do you let people know that? And, we're about 6 or 7 years into what we call the innovation campus, which is, they've got public companies, businesses, Airbus and Textron, and all, that come onto our campus, and they work with students and they do their business there and all that kind of stuff. And so there's some really interesting things going on there. How do you get that word out? So I think that's kind of the goal. And I guess part of the way you do that is, we try to find the interesting stories and get that out. And you hope that, other people will read them, and maybe that'll turn into a bigger story, and we'll get some attention in the Chronicle of Higher Education or the Wall Street Journal. And now all of a sudden, maybe more people know about what Wichita State is doing. Athletically, it's a little bit similar. I just think I'm trying to find stories, I guess, on a big level. I just did a story that we posted yesterday. There's a distance runner at Wichita State, Rebecca Topham, who I guess some point over the last month or so, decided she wanted to tell her story. She was really a struggling student when she came to Wichita State back in 2015, really had a difficulty reading. And, they got here and they really worked hard with her. And she's been a great student. She's got a 3.8 grade point average. She's been academic all conference in addition to an all-American runner. And, she talked to me a couple weeks ago and said, I want to tell this story. It might help other people. I kind of want to get it out there. And so those are I enjoy doing those kind of stories and having a relationship with, with a young woman that she feels confident, trusts you to tell the story. So that's nice. And then I think the other part of the athletics piece is, there's less coverage of women's basketball or volleyball. The Eagle may not staff those like they did 10 years ago because they don't have the people to do it. And frankly, sometimes those stories don't draw a lot of reader interest. So I try to go to, as many of those events as I can. I don't know that I went to every home women's basketball game, but I think I made most of them. So you're trying to find those stories that maybe because the media landscape is changing, are not getting done like they were in 2008.
It's funny because those types of things I think are happening more and more frequent, where people can sort of tell their own story to get it out there themselves. So I think that's a great service you're providing for soccer fans and for Wichita State University. So hopefully they're taking advantages of your longtime journalistic and communications ability, sir. Tell the folks how they can follow you online. You're very active on Twitter. Let them know how they can follow you and the Roundhouse.
GoShockers.com. That's where Roundhouse stories and podcasts are posted. I'll have to look at my Twitter handle at Roundhouse News for the Wichita State stuff. And then I also have a personal Twitter account at Paul Suellentrop. So you can find me both of those places. GoShockers.com is a good place to start for those kind of stories. And then I guess my academic university side stuff that I do and a lot of other people do. We have a lot of students that write interesting stuff about what's going on at Wichita State, and that's all at wichita.edu.